segregation, then we use on 45 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I don't have the extensive authoring duration with either Spain or Japan, but I've been here for about a month now. That's the reason I'm presenting. So this is work with my PhD student, now ex-PhD student Muntasir Chaudhuri. And I guess before I start, let me just mention that this paper is a bit unusual for me because it's more policy-oriented than my usual work. And also, so I thought maybe this is more appropriate for a general audience, like this one. And the paper is actually it's a relatively new paper, so it's in a somewhat early stage, or at least we think that we are going to get more results or more general results. So just to say this, and of course comments are welcome. So I'm really curious actually to see the feedback here, because the paper has only been presented so far in front of matching theory audience, and actually it was an earlier version. Okay, so what is the paper about? So basically, so it is as the title indicates, it's about school choice mechanisms and what their impact might be on school segregation. So our motivation was the following. We can see, and this is of course very sort of generalized statement. So again, there is a huge literature underlying all this, which I cannot say that I have a very thorough command of. But anyway, so we can see, generally speaking, that there is an increase in school segregation around the world, and that there is also an increase in desegregation efforts by introducing different programs, which I don't go into the details of this. And the immediate acceptance mechanism is gradually being replaced by the deferred acceptance mechanism all over the world. I will tell you quickly what these are, if you're not familiar with them. And so the question is, why is school segregation increasing despite efforts to desegregate, and despite the more frequent use of a theoretically superior school assignment mechanism, the deferred acceptance, as opposed to immediate acceptance? And of course, this is a huge sort of topic, and we are only looking at one specific aspect of this, which is the what we refer to as a segregation paradox, which is from a matching theory perspective, and specifically the use of the mechanism, the school choice mechanism that assigns students to schools. Okay. So we are looking at, as I just mentioned, the role of matching mechanisms in school segregation, and we are working with a very, very simple mechanism, which is a stylized, a very, very simple model, mechanism, which is a stylized model, basically to allow us to address this question in a framework that allows us to get some clear-cut answers. And it turns out, which is somewhat of a surprise for us as well, which is that our results imply that the IA mechanism, immediate acceptance, actually has a better impact on segregation than the EA. So of course, this is a very, very complex issue, but basically this finding gives at least a matching theory explanation for this segregation paradox. And what I would like to end here is that there are many variables that are very difficult to change, right? Around segregation, like the funding, or just the fact that we have high and low socioeconomic status students and so on. But one thing that is actually relatively easy to change is the mechanism. So just because of this one point, I think that it's actually really quite important to look at the impact of the mechanism, even if the mechanism itself is not the main factor or the main variable in what's going on in segregation. So, just to point this out. Okay, So some of the related literature, so there's a vast literature, and this is just a very quick sort of trying to give some idea of what's going on. So a lot of the literature basically argues that DA is better than IA. So this is, most of this literature is actually experimental or based on simulations. Some of it is empirical, but a lot of the, especially earlier literature argues that actually the deferred acceptance leads to better outcomes in terms of segregation or helping low sort of underprivileged students than immediate acceptance, and a lot of those arguments center around the following. So it's well known that the immediate acceptance mechanism is very manipulable, and not just the fact that it's manipulable, but actually parents who are better informed are able to manipulate better than parents who are less informed, and of course it's likely that the better informed parents, the more sophisticated, strategically more sophisticated parents are parents of the, or they are the sort of the more privileged parents like students. Okay? So this, in principle, could imply that that the immediate acceptance mechanism, because of this differential success of manipulation, would lead to more segregation. So it's also shown that under some conditions, immediate acceptance is more efficient than deferred acceptance. So theoretically, it is more efficient, right? But because of the manipulability, we cannot be sure that it actually turns out to be more efficient. But it is shown by several papers. So I'm only mentioning a few here. There are lots and lots of papers. Okay, but basically, we can argue that under certain conditions, immediate acceptance is more efficient, and so it should be considered. And in fact, as a mechanism, shouldn't just be completely discarded. Okay. Then there is a more recent paper which argues that the TTC, which is the top trading cycles mechanism, is superior to DA. So this is another famous mechanism, less used than deferred acceptance or immediate acceptance. But the argument is that it does better in providing access to better schools for disadvantaged students. And also, there is some recent work, and these are experimental and empirical, which actually indicate what we are getting theoretically, which is that the IA leads to immediate acceptance, leads to more diverse schools and to more equitable outcomes across applicants of different priorities than the DA in experiments in a recent paper. And there is also now an empirical study which is in favor of the IA mechanism in this kind of segregation context. Okay, so just very briefly, very quickly, so again, I'm not doing any justice to this literature, because it's